So I get control of the topic today then.
Oh, yes.
I listened to a conversation between lots of people in the OECD
Hmm.
yesterday about research engagement and research use in educational systems specifically.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask you, because you have no idea what I'm talking about, how would you define, put a meaning behind educational use and educational meaning? Like, how would you differentiate the two?
How will I differentiate educational use and educational meaning?
As in
Education.
educational research use, educational research meaning. As in like the research of education. What meaning do you have behind the use and engagement? So essentially, what's the difference between those two words in this context?
That's a good question. I like that one. So, those words are just annoying words. They're those words that are just not, they don't mean anything.
Yes, they do.
Do they mean any educational research use? Well, I suppose it's the use of research and education is the simplest and easiest answer to that. I would assume that is teachers interacting with the research and using it in the environment of the classroom or in like prepping their staff and all of that lovely stuff. That's kind of what I get from the first bit.
I like the fact that you're having to think about this because in the OECD conference that they were talking about, it's available on YouTube for anyone interested. It's, I think, EduSkills is the channel, but they didn't prep anyone that went into it, the difference between them. They just assumed everyone knew. Now, I know what it means through the OECD because I've been reading through their documentation, thousands and thousands of pages. So I'm very familiar.
Hmm.
But people going into that, people being teachers, policymakers, researchers, independent people that are interested, so stakeholders, parents, students, why they would be in that conference, I don't know, but you never know. How would they know?
Because
Because
it's
you are
not
a
really
stakeholder, you are a parent.
it's-
To give you some uh, motivation, you did get the first one somewhat correct. It is using the research in practice. That's what
yeah, and I'm still trying to get the other one because that one's a bit like
engagement.
engagement. Engaging. Maybe it is related to like just engaging with the research. So being part of the research instead of just using the information passively, it's actively partaking in maybe doing the research, researching the research, and lots of research.
Yes, pretty much. That's where the chat in the Zoom call. So, for context, it was an event on Zoom that was live
Mm,
streamed to YouTube. So
okay.
people were commenting inside the Zoom chat. I was in the Zoom chat, and a lot of people were asking similar questions, as in, what do we mean by engagement? What do we mean by use? And taking it out of the educational research context for a second, I think it's the same for all information online. People use information online
Mm.
doesn't mean they actually engage with the information that's being shared. They'll
I
look at
see.
something and go, that's cool, I'm gonna use that, but they don't understand the full context or any of the nuances around it, so they don't actually engage with the information. And then they moan, whine, bitch that it didn't work. You're like, that's because you didn't actually engage with the information. You just used it from what you saw or what you think you saw.
Taking it at face value versus trying to actually leap and jump and dive into it a little bit deeper.
Yes. So
Mm,
that's the way they were framing it. And lots of people, from what they were talking about, use research because they're
yeah.
now saying evidence-based, evidence-backed, and this evidence supports, which is great, but you could say that about everything. Everything is evidence-based because all you need is some academic that really needs to publish a paper. They do some research that could be really shoddy, and then they publish it because they need it to keep their job, and then, oh, yay, my method is research-backed and evidence-based. Okay. Whereas when you engage with the research and you look at what all of the different researchers are saying, well, now you're not just evidence backed, you're engaged with the research, but that requires time, which was one of the
Yeah.
barriers that they brought up time, tease, people to discuss it with, because you can't just sit there and go, oh, yes, I'm going to engage in this research by myself, unless you've got lots of time to do it, i.e., you're a researcher, which
Yeah.
teachers aren't.
No,
Parents aren't.
no.
Students certainly aren't.
No matter how much I would like to be a researcher, although I started reading some stuff the other day, and my son was just looking out, and he was like, "What's that?" I started putting together just kind of a canvas around ecological stuff again because I hadn't done it for so long. I was like, let me just try and get myself in that space again. Started putting some notes down from the book and pulling it around, and Adrian was just like, "What's that? What's that?" And I'm like, "All right, sit down.
Let's do this. Let's engage you into the ecological cult.
Yeah.
I can see that becoming a thing eventually because obviously Gibsonian psychology was somewhat cult-ish in the 1960s, 70s because it was so radical, and it is so radical that they would fight anyone that disagreed with them. But yeah, so moving again back to this engagement, I'm curious how you would encourage stakeholders to be engaged in research. So this was one of the questions that one of the panelists mentioned. Well, it wasn't a question, it was more of a statement of like a mission statement, kind of. What incentives can leaders in school, so however you define leaders, the Japanese panelist took a nice little philosophical dive into what a leader actually is and what it means. How can leaders try and incentivize teachers, researchers, people in ed to engage with the research?
Mm.
Because at the moment, teachers, there aren't really many incentives to engage with it. And there's lots of reasons why you wouldn't engage with it, like
Yeah.
time, complexity. Do you have any initial ideas? Because I think that would also be a guiding principle. I don't want to say an answer, but a guiding principle for others navigating digital information online. Because there
I
aren't
think it'd
many
be very
incentives.
much it'd be very much making it matter, like really putting it into the context of the environment that they're actually in, if we were to use an ecological approach to it. It's bringing it into the real world because a lot of research is so theoretical. Like I remember when I started diving into ecopsych, a lot of it came from, Rob Gray and all of the sports based. And so it took you to go, yeah, but this is also applicable in education, for me to go, oh, this is applicable in education. I would assume education and learning. I would assume it's applicable in business. Okay, cool. So and that got me interested. That got me to become instead of just using it to engage in it. And now I've never stopped. And even now, when I start looking at, and going back in and reading the book and talk and thinking about it, I'm thinking about it from different perspectives. I'm thinking about it from my business. I'm thinking about it from like my family and helping my family with all the things that they need help with as a parent. But it only happened because it mattered. There was a reason that is beyond that, well, you should do it. Because often I think policyholders are just like, well, this is important that you do it. Well, why? I've got marking up to here, I've got X, Y, Z, I've got all of these things that I'm trying to do. All the bureaucracy. Why should I care?
And what I
And
find mildly ironic about that
Mm,
is it's the same thing students say. Why should I care about learning this thing for a test or an assessment that's not really going to matter? I'm never going to use this in real life, blah, blah, blah. All of those student comments. And teachers are saying the same thing when it comes to policies being put on teachers. Like, it's not unique. As the
no,
ecological approach suggests, everyone perceives the same. It's just going to increase going up the ladder. Like the traditional approaches pushes cause and it pushes the problem back to the central executive, and the central executive, we go, I don't know. I feel like that's the problems that we're seeing inside of education systems and online information as well,
mm,
because I would classify online information sharing as an education system. It's the
mm,
same. You just push the problem back further and further up the chain, whatever chain you're looking at. Like,
yeah, yeah,
why should I care?
be
So,
told
John,
what, yeah.
how would you make people care about the research that you're interested in? Actually, I probably shouldn't have worded it like that because you don't really want to make someone care about something they don't care
No,
about. But how would you try and influence them?
I'm just asking questions. Oh, that's what I've been doing. For all intents and purposes, it's kind of what I've been doing. It depends. If they are showing a passing interest, I would wait for the interest. I wouldn't try and force it upon them. It would be, okay, well, I'm thinking about this right now, and oh, the example from last episode before is a good example. We were just talking. It was, let's try and solve a problem. So a problem was my son was struggling with, tidying stuff up, or like I keep forgetting, I have a bad memory, and the assumptions that come with that. And going from an ecological perspective, just started to ask questions and remain curious and said, oh, well, okay, cool. Well, then does that mean you're completely stuffed then? Because if your memory store is broken, you can't exactly open your brain and replace your memory RAM, can you?
Oh
You can't.
yeah, yeah, surgery in the future, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. We're gonna find the one point in our brain that store. We're gonna find the M.2 slot in our brain.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
I
It's
really quite like that now. That
you
is
see,
quite a good, hilarious analogy of how stupid it sounds. Anyway,
well, we are machines. Remember,
yeah,
you the same way you take a tire off a car and put another one on, you can do that with a body. You just can. Like the body won't reject any other person's body part. Why would it do that? We're machines.
that's so weird when you think about it.
That's the analogy people
That
use.
is how we treat our bodies as machines.
Well, yeah. Well, that's what Descartes suggested in the what is it, 1600s? But obviously mind-body dualism, but then the body being a machine controlled by the mind, forgetting the whole philosophical issue with how can a thing that has no physical stand in the world and there's no proof that it exists apart from we think that it does, how that can control our body, I don't know. Dualism, we reject it in the ecological approach. But the idea that the body is a machine is silly. Like there are too many flaws with it.
Yeah.
And yet people still use that as as a metaphor, and you're like, nah, it's it's useful sometimes. Like it's useful sometimes, but it doesn't mean it's an accurate representation of what is it that we're
So
talking
when is
about.
it useful?
Medical research.
Okay.
Like because when looking at medical research, they take apart the human body and put
Mm.
parts back in. So using that metaphor to isolate which part is a part and not just the organ, because you can't take the organism out of the organism unless you're looking at a different organism, which in ecological terms would be a different system. But in medical terms, it makes more sense to say, I'm going to take the heart or the lung or the leg or the knee, like the bone, those parts of the system, which is the organism. So they
Like,
use that metaphor to help them figure out what it is they're actually talking about. But to me, that's more of a linguistic metaphor to help them work out what it is they're
a
discussing.
linguistic constraint in a way.
Yeah, it's a deliberate constraint to simplify the environment they're working in so that they can conceptualize what it is that they're trying to do. Because if you were to say, oh yeah, we're going to take this self-organized, self-autonomous system out of this self-organized, self-autonomous system, and then we go, yeah, no.
I think people would be dead by the time they even explained what they were going to do.
Obviously, you'd make the assumptions, you wouldn't say it all the time, but having those things in there, it would just overcomplicate what's going on, which I think is where like the health sciences are getting to at this point now, because much of the I don't want to say obvious because it wasn't obvious when we found it out, but much of the stuff that we know today about the way the body works, the way the body functions, the surface level information, as it were, we have typically two legs, two arms, lungs, all that sort of stuff. Like we can't really go inwards anymore, as in inwards towards lower order variables. Well, in typical Newtonian physics and Euclidean geomics,
Geometrics?
geometrics, that's the word. I was like, geo, yeah, geometrics. Yeah, when looking at those two low order variables, like I mean, you could go all the way down to like wavelengths, but that's a bit far for health. But when we're looking at those variables, it's been helpful. It's been useful. We've gone down, we found all the different bits. That's great. But we can't go down anymore until we go into atoms. but looking at the atom level to try and figure out how to deal with health stuff, obviously that's what the cancer research is looking at microscopes going really, really narrow. But is it possible that we're looking too far? Like we're looking too close. We need to step back and actually have a look at some macro variables and go, okay, we've got a body here. What are other multi-nonlinear causes that could be triggering or could be related to this health issue? Which is where the entire field of psychology comes in. And that's where they sort of add on, hey, it might not just be you. The environment might have a role to play. Let's dump that on the end and call that another factor. You can tell I have some animosity about that.
Yeah. It's not important. It's just, everything that surrounds us all the time.
It's just needed for an organism to perceive, because when you think about it, when you talk about psychology without engaging with the environment, you're talking about the organism in a void. The
But
organism
if you
is,
think about that, that's what they do.
but yeah. So when psychologists say, "Oh, well, I think this is your insert thing here," well, no, that has to be related to the environment. Otherwise, I would be functioning in a void. But we don't function in a void. We are in a environment. So I don't just suddenly perceive something. I don't just suddenly sense something. No, I'm sensing because I'm perceiving for action. I'm doing something, therefore I
Mm.
perceive the thing or the things because you don't just, it's not snapshots, it's a continual process. But as you're perceiving the affordances within the environment, if the environment changes, so does the perception of the affordances, which means you change your action because you perceive for action. And when and the psychologists say, "Oh no, I think it was related to this one trauma that I'm going to isolate back in your childhood." You're like, "Yeah, it could be a factor, but I'm not in a void. The things that are going on right now are also playing a significant role." So I'm not saying trauma isn't a bad like isn't contributing to what's going on, but I'm saying trauma within the environment that it happened.
Mm.
Actually, this brings me to a question that I've been pondering. I don't have an answer to this, so John, I expect you to give me a perfectly succinct explained answer to this one.
Absolutely, I'm ready for it.
Right.
There is only one answer, obviously.
Put your philosophy hat on. So, instance,
Oh, here we go. Wow. Okay. Existence.
yes, when we think about our own existence, Descartes
Mhm.
in 1600 suggested that I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, and my understanding is that his thinking behind that was, I have doubt, and the doubt must come from somewhere, therefore I exist, right? That's the logic. And if we assume realism, the world exists, not solipsism, it doesn't, then I exist. But how do I know that the past exists? Because when you think about the past, how is that different from thinking about the future or thinking about things that you would like to exist? How is there a difference? How do I know the past existed? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Through the
Because
environment we're in, does it exist? I guess, but the relationship with it has changed due to where I am now.
and I
And
think
also
hmm,
like
think out loud.
there isn't really a past or a future. It's just happening all the time. Because
That's
even though something is happening, I did something this week, I'm still thinking about it now. Every time I open my inbox, I'm thinking about what I did then. But eventually that will entropy. So
mhm.
I won't be thinking about it. Does that mean it no longer exists? Well, no, because something will trigger. Say, for example, a couple of weeks go by, and then suddenly I get the email that I was thinking about like 2 weeks ago, or maybe a year goes by, and I get, and then all of those things will come back because I'm interacting within that environment, because I'm interacting within the current environment, which is almost bringing back how I was feeling then. And if we assume that it's not just the mind that holds memories, but it's all of
The
us,
mind doesn't exist.
yeah, exactly. If we assume that mind, which it doesn't, but our body holds that, then you've got that
Well,
as well.
we hold that, the
We,
relationship between us and the environment. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I agree. That's where I got to. I posed the original question, and the flaw, I guess you could say, that I had with that was like you mentioned, past. How do I know the past existed? Well, how do I define what past is? Because
Mm,
technically, as I speak,
we're in
before I
the
even
past.
finish my sentence, it's in the past now because it's happened.
And I'm also in the future because I'm thinking about how to respond to your question and how to communicate and
Precisely.
engage in that. So I'm in the past and the present and the future all at once.
And that I think is encompassed by the term current future. In the
Mm,
ecological psychology literature, they talk about the current future. So if there, I mean, this could be kind of radical here. If there isn't a past and there is a current future, and there isn't a future, there's just a current future, and present is transient anyway, because present disappears as soon as it's happened. So I
mhm.
don't think it's relevant to talk about a present because it's multiple snapshots that appear. You're like, no, it's just currently what's going on, the relationship between us and the environment. So talking about this current future, how do we know the current future exists? Well, that's what we're experiencing. So how do we know a memory existed? Well, it's in the current future, but then how do we know that it doesn't exist and it's a hallucination? How do we differentiate between a memory and a hallucination? Because obviously we don't remember things as well as we could have. Some of the details we don't remember accurately
Mm,
because we forget things, because the body doesn't need to remember everything, because otherwise we would be doing far too much work, expending far too much energy
yeah,
to remember everything because it's unnecessary. So how do
yeah.
we differentiate an accurate current future and an inaccurate current future? I told you
Which,
this would get philosophical.
yeah, which very, when you start thinking about it like that, and especially with how much influence the environment has on what, I suppose, what you remember, it will change how the interactions with the past and the future are. Because it's not,
That's what's interesting to me. If I was to try and recall our conversation right now, I
mm,
wouldn't be able to do it very well.
no,
I would have to try and recreate that conversation.
yeah,
And that recreation is me building up the relationship again between myself, you, and the environment that we're discussing it. That's the current future. The current future would then be the next iteration of the conversation because time is obviously constant moving forwards, but we've actually gone backwards in time and forwards in time at the same time.
time.
Yeah. Quantum time. Don't know. Just add quantum in front of stuff and it makes it sound really big and important. Quantum physics, quantum time, yeah. Uh, but yeah, so
Quantum productivity.
yes, I don't really know what quantum actually means when it comes to explanations of physics. It's just people say quantum physics and it makes them sound smart. Oh, I don't know what that means. I
And
think this.
also, another thing I was thinking about when when you recreate like the conversation, it's also fundamentally different because I'm not there. I'm not
that
in the. I wouldn't even be there. So
that's the thing. It's
you're recreating a version of me that is created by you based on what you perceive. It's not easy to perceive what I was thinking, but I didn't say.
It's related to skills, and I'm just speaking from what I'm thinking. I'm speaking what I'm thinking. It's related to skills because the the way that we develop skills is obviously through repetition,
Mm,
but there is no there is no exact repetition. It's repetition without repetition. We repeat
yeah,
things not exactly the same.
yeah,
So, because there is variation in everything that we do, and energy is uniquely structured. That's part of the ecological approach. All
Yeah.
energy that is perceived is uniquely structured, creating unique patterns. So the memory, or no, the experiences that we're remembering throughout the current futures are uniquely structured patterns of energy between us and the environment, which would mean that when you do it again, it's repetition without repetition. So when we're remembering something, it's repetition without repetition,
Mm.
which means when you're remembering something, you're actually training a skill, or it would be like training a skill. So hallucination would be like, I'm trying to reframe hallucinations in the form of skill development because that's something I've grappled with more. How would I explain a hallucinated skill? Or maybe that is a future possibility. Hallucination is a future possibility of the current future.
Yeah, and that also links to things like like the concept of
Mm.
deja vu. It's almost the same thing.
Because maybe you thought about that possibility before, but it didn't happen. But you remember thinking about it before, so you remember what you were remembering, or you remember the current future at the time, but the current
Mm.
future may not have actually happened as in physical experience happened, but it happened in your experience of the world because your experience isn't always physical. Your experience is also, I would say psychological, but for consensus sake, probably say happens in the mind. But nah, I I don't know. I would just say we experience it. I don't want to go any further than that. I don't want to dive any deeper, but a lot of people would want to say, oh, but that's a physical experience and that's a mental experience. And I don't think that's accurate. I think it's
And I
a,
also don't think that even really matters. Physical, mental, it's still
if I
it's
sit here, I have an experience.
yeah,
It's my unique experience.
yeah,
But what's going on in my head is an experience I'm having, you're not having.
yeah. But no, because
Because my experience is different from your experience. What you're
yes,
thinking about, I don't know. I don't
yeah,
know what you're thinking about. I know the energy that you're giving out in this
yeah,
relationship. Energy through body language, through conversation, through vibrations, words, light, blah, 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 all the different energies. But your experience is different from my experience. So when I think people say, oh, it's a bodily or it's a physical experience and a mental experience, I think we could reconceptualize that and reframe the question and say, no, that's my experience, the body experience that can be shared. Because if I'm doing something, if I'm saying something, the energy is being put out into an environment where other organisms can perceive that and it becomes a joined experience. Whereas the mental experience is a personal one. So I would reframe that. Instead of saying a body or a mind experience, it's a unique individual experience or a shared experience.
yeah. It's also kind of reminds me of when I've kind of very lightly touched on the subject of the environment. Often it is assumed and presumed that it is the physical environment.
Mm.
And it's like, yes, it is the physical environment, but there's also that mental environment, the social environment, like
Using those words like loosely.
using the words very lightly and very like because they are a shared language and constraining it into those boxes, labels to put a label on something that doesn't make sense.
It makes sense using this is where language comes into psychology.
Yeah.
We had a fire last night downstairs and my throat's dry because of smoke. uh, but yeah, so with there was a I should probably add some context. We had a fire in a fireplace. We have fires in our house, and we were burning some wood.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I'm glad you clarified. I'm like, wait a minute, fire? Wait, what? Hang on, hang on, hang on. I assume you mean the fireplace, not an
yeah,
actual like proper fire.
no, not like bonfire, bonfire. Like we have a fire. We have well, technically we have four fireplaces because we're in a whole old house. But we use one of the fireplaces downstairs, and we were burning some of the wood that we were given to us by our neighbors because they chopped down some trees recently, and the wood was not a nice smell. Like I like the smell of wood because I was brought up in forests and like scouts and stuff, so I love it. But it was extremely potent, and it was it would have been fine, but because it was a dry log and the smoke was just bellowing out of the fire, it made the room really potent, and it got caught at the back of my throat. So we had to open up windows and stuff to let the fumes out a little bit. But it, yeah, and it's, I don't know, it's sort of caught on the back of my throat because obviously it's still sort of around in the house, which is nice. Like I like the smell of wood in the house, but that bit of wood just, I don't know, caught the back of my throat nicely. But yeah, we were talking about existence and shared existences.
And like the how to, because one of the things that I'm trying to unpack when I talk to people around environment is it's automatically assumed the physical.
Mhm.
That's the first assumption. Okay, cool. Well, my desk is clean and tidy, so I should be able to do all these things. It's like, cool, but are you? No. Why? And then it's kind of just constraining it slightly to say, okay, cool. Well, what about like the environment you're sharing with other people, the social environment, which is still not great, but it's sort of like the interaction between one another.
Hmm.
What is that like? What part of that is there? Then you've got the mental environment, like in your head. It's all in your head. Like what's happening there for you? And that kind of
So I'm gonna again think out loud. When I conceptualize the environment, I traditionally envisage a person standing in a void and then dots all around them. And those
mm,
dots represent energy, whether that's light energy, sound energy, their energy from the electromagnetic radiation. Yeah, I know, I'm going all physicsy shit. But yeah, so I envisage all of the different dots of energy because that is what we can perceive. It's structured energy, uniquely structured energy from bouncing off of surfaces and all that sort of stuff, which is great. But there is an element of existence that has energy within the organism. Like there is
yes,
energy within the organism.
yes.
So I need to, when I'm thinking about this, I need to remember that obviously there are dots inside of the organism as well, and I think those dots could represent the environment. But then it begs the question: what is the organism? Well, it's a system inside of a system. Okay, great. There's no solid boundaries on that. To use a term from the free energy principle, there's no Markov blanket. There's no defining line between an organism and the free energy. There is just energy. And the free energy in the free energy principle, you would express to structured light or structured energy, uniquely structured energy inside the environment, which can be perceived and used through the system for things, for action, for perceiving, for action, which is great. Love that. But where's the Markov blanket for the organism? Is it the skin?
That was where I immediately went. Then you realize you get that kind of something brushes and touches from outside, and then you feel that, and then that's kind of you're then interacting with the environment again, and then like it's not now that's become part of the organism because there's a reaction and it's reacting, and but also you are reacting with that environment. So no, but yes. And I think the risk with that is it just gets so I suppose that's probably the hard part with what we do is how do you properly explain something that is unexplainable?
It's
Really?
it's not unexplainable, but we need to constrain our language,
Yes.
and it's how we choose to constrain our language that makes it difficult to explain.
Mm,
What we've done previously in the traditional approaches is to add labels to them, but that pushes back the problem. It doesn't explain anything, it just describes situations.
mm.
And and that's where I was thinking as you were going through the example of the skin. What causes all of that? You would go, well, it's the nervous system. Nervous system goes all the way up to the brain, and then the brain starts thinking about it through the neurons, neuron pathways, electron, blah blah blah, and then it always goes to the thing, the mind, the central executive. but we've said that doesn't exist. So where the traditional approaches would try and describe this situation and it would fall all the way back to the central executive, we sit there and go, well, we don't think that thing exists. So what is the cause? What is the barrier? We're like, And it has to come back to systems theory, complexity theory, and the boundaries or the fluid boundaries between systems. I think as an organism, there is an organism's barrier, Markov blanket, whatever you want to call it. But that barrier is obviously unique to each organism because it has to be. But I also think it's somewhat, what's the word? Things can pass through it. It's, the thing in biology where it's permeable.
That's the word. I couldn't think about it. I was like, transparent, translucent, opaque. No, none of those.
I'm like going through my glossary of biology terms. It's not osmosis, but it's related to osmosis. If active, was it active transport was the other one? Is that it? Osmosis in an Hank Green, help me. You did biology for me. So permeable. It's a permeable barrier. And the energy passes backwards and forwards through it, which, I mean, is just like biology in the system, because we are, at the end of the day, talking about biology, are talking about action and how organisms work, ecology, ecological, plus, which, like, Churchill nod, that's great. But I really want to go on a side tangent, but I'm trying to stay on track.
No, side tangent away.
So, Andrew Wilson, this is going back a lot of months. Andrew Wilson, I say there was a call that I was on that he was on, and the discussion was about the free energy principle and Bayesian statistics and trying to discuss the interactions between the two, because Carl Friston doesn't have a stake in the IP or the ED thing. Like he's not information processing, Bayesian statistics, is it? And he's not ecological dynamics and systems theory, is it? Here's my free energy principle, and I think this works inside of physics. And there was a conversation going on about Bayesian statistics and how the Bayesian modeling can be used inside of free energy, or can use the free energy principle inside of its modeling of how we think we predict in the world, or they think we predict in the world. And Andrew Wilson was on this call. Andrew Wilson being from ecological psychology. I think he and I were the main people from ecological psychology, if I'm remembering accurately. There were a couple of other people in there that studied memory, that took an ecological approach to it, but most of them were Bayesian statistics people and people from physics. So lots of them talking about thermodynamic regulation and maximum likelihoods and all that sort of stuff. Great fun. Insert more jargony stuff, which I can't remember because I'm not a physicist. But towards the end of the conversation, having added all that context, Andrew Wilson said, at the end of the day, you over there in the Bayesian statistics are a mathematical science. You are a physical science. You're studying physics and maths. We over here in ecological psychology are studying biology. And it's a biology science, which is where you can see the link, which is why I started thinking about it. And he said, we are a biological science. We study organisms in environments, which is encompassed through the study of psychology. We are not studying physics and maths, which in the ecological psychology book, Introduction to Ecological Psychology by Jeff and Julia, they talk about the language shift between Euclidean geometry and Newtonian physics. You guys go talk about those variables over there. We're talking about perception and action and the environment being engaged with the organism and the biological systems over here. And when we were talking about biology a second ago, that's where I started thinking, actually, hold on, yeah, we have our own language, constraints, affordance, invariance, bivariance, bifurcations, blah, 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 insert jargon. We have words and terms to describe the interactions we have as biological systems within environments, ecology. But the language is still evolving, as is the field of research. I mean, direct learning wasn't a thing 5 years ago, but is it 5? Maybe 10. Maybe 10 years ago. I don't remember the date because it's not a piece of information I tend to remember, but I know there's research about direct learning that comes from the ecological approach. But
Yeah.
that didn't exist. I know it didn't exist in the 1900s because the researchers are fairly young. I say fairly young, they're like 40. Most researchers that are publishing tons of papers are like 60. But technically, they're not actually writing the papers, they're just throwing their names on the papers. But that's a whole other academic spiel that we won't go down there. But yeah, so if we're studying biological systems, which I think we are,
Yeah.
and there aren't really tangible barriers and borders and Markov blankets we can attach to organisms apart from the physical barriers, i.e., there is a physical thing, there is a skin there, or there is a difference between that material and that material. But then when you go all the way down to the atomic level, you're like, well, obviously there's differences between each atom. So you're like, okay, how do you add these barriers in? And that's where the free energy principle potentially could be used in explaining the ecological approach, which is why when people say, oh, Carl Friston and the ecological approach Carl Friston and the free energy principle aren't in the ecological approach, I think it's because a lot of the research they've engaged with is predictive. It is information processing driven. But I don't think it means the principles can't be taken out of physics and maths and put into biology. I've done a lot of rambling there. Say something.
Yeah. I'm wondering if pieces of all of it can be applied in an ecological sense. Like all of the theories and ideas
My eyes are wide open. Please elaborate.
could. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, keep thinking out loud. I like it when people think out loud because then we're on the same wavelength. Look at that, Newtonian physics coming involved.
It's like if you think about when people start talking and when I started interacting with this and engaging with the ecological approach, there were still pieces, very small pieces. If we constrain it and assume it's a constrained approach or a constrained explanation in the effort to simplify, there are still pieces of IP that sort of make sense. Don't like that phrasing, but there are still pieces where you constrain it. But if you assume it's a constrained approach and there are constraints added, and a lot of them, some not as good as others, but
don't you dare do that. Oh, we're gonna step a bridge across the EDIP. Don't you dare do that to me.
I don't think it's possible to believe, but I think it's possible to.
I knew there was a butt coming.
I could see it being possible to take people on a journey across the bridge using what they already know, using their assumptions of information processing, and then almost expanding beyond that. Because that's basically what you did with me. From my perception, that's what you did with me. We started from an IP because because changing belief is hard.
Maybe it's the analogy I'm struggling with.
Maybe.
I don't think I took you across a bridge. I think I climbed down my mountain, ran up your mountain, and pointed at the clouds and said,
grabbed you and went,
yeah, above those clouds over there's a mountain that's higher than where we're standing here. And obviously you couldn't see that. So I sort of, I got my fan and blew all the clouds out the way and said, see, look, it's over there. And then we went down the mountain and came back up.
Yeah, but the thing that I think I'm struggling with is that why did I come down the mountain? Going back to what we were already talking about, why did I come down the mountain to go back up? Because that mountain's a lot higher and there's a lot further to climb on that mountain. Whereas this mountain is easier. I've spent a long time climbing this mountain that I'm climbing.
And you got a house and everything up there.
I know this mountain. I know where every rock goes. I know where every little valley is. But I don't know that mountain, and it's tall and it's scary and it's complicated and there's lots more jagged edges that don't make sense and there's a lot more freedom but I don't like it. And so from it's not bridging, but it also is because I don't think you made me go all the way down to go all the way back up. I think you did build a bridge.
Really?
I think you did, yeah. I think you did build a bridge, or you did
I,
something
I
that made
remember us
me
fighting
go,
about direct perception for like an hour after one of those conversations.
yes, yeah, but you did. But after a point, it was like, oh, okay, cool.
The way I remember it is that we had conversations, and I would express my opinions, my views, my thoughts
Mm,
with the struggles, situations that you were having, the relationships you were having. And when you got to a point of asking more questions about how it works, like how is that possible? That doesn't make sense to me. When you opened up to asking those questions, that to me, using the analogy of the mountains, is me blowing away the clouds. Then once we'd blown away the clouds and you'd gone, oh, how do I get up there? That's when we started
yeah,
walking down your hill.
yeah.
Because I did not go across and say, right, well, you see, we have invariance in the environment, and that's what we perceive through affordances.
Maybe it's less of a bridge straight across and more of a bridge.
It's very, very loopy bridge.
Yeah.
It's
And
like it's
also,
a
I'm working from my current, like,
current future.
my current future that I know a bit about
Mm.
the ecological approach now. But I it was interesting. One of the things that you said in our interview was that I was firmly on the interview with Julia and Jeff.
Thank you. I was like, interview?
Second.
What?
On the
When
interview with
did you
Julia and
interview
Jeff, we were like,
me?
I was firmly in the like information processing, and I'm like, yeah, but was I? Because I there is obviously recency bias and all of this, and I was really
Pause for a
intrigued.
second. Pause for a second. I thought you were ecological by that point, or were you still like,
No,
I get the words, but
no. I was ecological, but what you were saying is when you first introduced it to me, I was firmly in the information processing,
right.
and and that was not my experience. I understood information processing, but there were things I didn't like, and I was trying to find something else. That's why I kept kind of asking questions because I assumed it was fine, but I also, there was something in me as such that was like, yeah, but this doesn't actually answer this. And this just feels a little convoluted.
But having doubts about an explanation to something doesn't mean that you're not in that camp.
True.
Like I have doubts about ecological psychology. Doesn't mean I'm not firmly embedded in the views and the approach.
True.
The reason I say you were firmly in IP is whenever there was an explanation to be had, you would use memory, working memory,
Yeah, the language.
all those words and terms and all the baggage that comes with those words and terms. There wasn't a language of an ecological approach at all. The idea of a relationship between organism and environment being required for perception, that idea wasn't articulated at all in any of your explanations beforehand. Constraints wasn't used, like the language of ED wasn't there. But even outside of using the terms from ED, there wasn't an opening where I could say, oh, that's an ecological view. It was all very similar with Carl that came in the conversation the other day. He was explaining his experiences, but it was all through IP. We, like, both of us could recognize, oh, we would explain this like this now. But all of his explanations were through IP, and that was you.
So it was interesting to be you on that side with that conversation.
Being on the big mountain, looking at the person, pointing up.
Yeah, it was interesting to be in that position. I'm like, that's equally also really frustrating, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. It is very frustrating. Tying in the two conversations we've had, research engagement slash use
Mm.
with the ecological approach and diving deep into some of the terms of existence of memory and current futures, how do we try and encourage, incentivize individuals engaging with the ecological approach? Because that is what I feel my mission in life is. No,
Yeah,
it's not, but it's what I would like to push, because to me it's opened up a lot of freedom, it's given me a
yeah,
lot of autonomy, and it helped me. I mean, the ecological approach helped me through, I'm going to say it, suicide. Like it just did. If
yeah.
I didn't I know that sounds very, oh my God, it saved my life, which that's not the point. but it did get me through really difficult times, and it reframed the way that I view everything.
Yeah.
And it literally
And
changed the
I
way I
second that. I agree. I think it did for me as well. It's very much like, oh, the way I handle things has fundamentally changed.
the way I look at
The
every
way, yeah,
experience.
exactly. Just the way I interact with the world around me, the way I interact with other people has fundamentally changed
I feel
because
like I
of
want to
it.
tell my story. I'm like, I want to tell my story of the ecological approach, but it's like, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so how do we encourage or incentivize people to engage with this approach, and whether we want to actually do that? I personally would love to do it because, like I say, it's done so much for me,
Mm.
but I recognize I am biased. Maybe I am wrong because I am biased because, like I say, it did do a lot for me, the approach and the way that I now look at existence and experiences in the world. But yeah,
Yeah.
how would you thoughts?
I think just talking about it and it's exposure.
Dissemination.
I love it. Dissemination.
It's one of those words that you learn at university, you never use outside of the lecture hall unless there's one that real specific situation, like I'm going to disseminate my research.
It's interesting because as I've been in this period that I'm in for my business, and one of the things I always struggled with was content because I don't like the environment that is built with it, or the environment that I was aware of, attuned to, as it will.
Right.
But it's like, yeah, but I can choose to engage in a different way and start talking about things in a different way. How do I want to engage? Well, I think it's more writing. Although I'm good on camera and all that lovely stuff, writing allows me to. Here's a um I have a D&D group that meet every Monday, and it's online. But I recently created a Discord community which brings together two groups who are in and within the same world that I have created. And one of the things that this one group, my Coven of Chaos, as they call themselves, yeah, it's really cool. One of the things that they do a lot is they love the role play element, but they aren't good at it. I mean, I very much beg to differ, but we'll just put that in a pot over there. And seeing them engage in two different ways. One is live, literally in the call with me for like 5 hours, where we are chatting and talking and interacting with characters. And we had a Charon, which was hilarious, which I obviously played and enjoyed very much. And they were all in fits for a good few hours afterwards. And then we have in the Discord now, because we've recently moved over from Slack to Discord. Slack because originally the group wasn't set up by me. It was another wonderful human who kind of was like, "Who wants to do D&D? I never knew how to do D&D. I'll learn to be a DM and run games." And I was
Mhm.
like, "I'm a DM, I can help." And so I helped, and this group has emerged from there very rapidly, very rapidly. And so now we have a Discord community where they interact, but they also don't just role play in the chat. They don't just role play in the actual session. They role play in the Discord.
That's
And the
cool.
difference between the two, because they're chatting, they're typing, they have to think that little bit more. They have a chance to go, okay, cool, let's pause. Whereas role play is very live, improvisational, just thinking like that. And I was able, one of the things that myself and as well another one of the characters was doing was actually role playing another person's character because they were asleep, because there are two people in Europe and two people in the States. And so they were interacting together. But it was and I joined in one thing because I had information that they do not have about this character. And so being able to watch their interpretation of the same character and the use of text to do that allowed additional context to be added because they were typing, not
Yeah.
talking. And I think that for me is the thing I've always struggled with video. Whereas when I'm writing, it's almost less immediate. And whenever I've produced videos, they've been very much like they weren't written, they weren't scripted because I just got caught up in the menu. Oh, I assumed I got caught up in the minutia and would take too long with it. And I'm just like,
Just read out the script then.
yeah, that was that, and that's kind of where I've got to. I was like, okay, cool, right. If I do this, and so for
How,
me, the shift has been to writing again
Mhm.
because it gives me just a little bit of extra time to think.
How do you
Or
think I do my video essays?
that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm not going to be able to speak for an hour off the cuff about PISA 2022.
And
No, that
that
would
is
be a
something.
5 hour.
It's interesting because as I've been doing this and obviously the other stuff that I've done, I realized how the reason why I could talk off the cuff about all the other stuff was because I don't know, it just wasn't that interesting, I suppose.
The way that I think about speaking and writing and the differences between the two is they're
Mm.
both reading, they're both thinking,
Mm.
but writing, because of the relationship you have with the environment, there are different energy structures going through it with patterns, etc. So the behavior mode is different. If you have a different behavior mode, there are obviously, therefore, different affordances that you perceive,
Mm.
which I think is fairly obvious. When you're writing, you perceive different affordances to when we're writing, normally time is much longer, which is what you've obviously alluded to. You have more time when you're writing. You can go backwards and forwards with what it is that you would like to portray out into the world. Whereas video, once you've said it, you've said it. You can't cut back unless you edit. So when I think about the two, writing something has more thought. There is typically more complexity in the creation of the output, which means when you're doing video, there is less complexity, which means your understanding of the topic needs to be increased, or the level of complexity of the topic is inherently decreased anyway, both of which could happen with the IP explanations. When you have people that have limited expertise, they could talk for hours about something because it's not that complicated and they say things that most people would be able to relate to because it's surface information. On the other hand,
I
if you
think
have
that
an
that
ex yeah,
that right there has exactly been as I've been diving deeper into this topic and well engaging with it, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, it becomes a lot harder to just spiel. Now
hmm,
that is expertise, obviously, but even as I'm interacting, I'm asking when I'm talking about it, especially with my kids as well.
hmm,
It's been interesting how just my relationship with my two kids has drastically changed over the last couple of weeks as I've been really deliberately thinking about what we talk about here and the stuff that I actually do in my job and actually bringing my job as a coach into home instead
hmm.
of having that weird
I'm
forced separation.
yeah, I'm curious because I want to see if this mirrors the experiences that I've or the feedback that I've got from the experiences I've had. Do you think your children or anyone else around you has noticed a difference in the way that you're behaving?
I am now going to ask.
Okay.
I don't actually know. I'm not sure. I think so. No, maybe not.
Because when I so a background context, trampoline was my main sport until I lost my eyesight, and then I couldn't see how far up off the trampoline I was, and I didn't want to have to retrain every single skill because that's just not fun. And when I was going through my very difficult time, I was at a trampoline club, and I acted the way I did, very negative, very to myself. I just kept to myself, didn't talk with people. It was just I was just a person that existed really, and I didn't engage with anyone like at all. I was just doing my thing. I'd get on, I'd do my skills. I have a panic attack because I'm failing because of the way that I was looking at the world, and then going off into a corner, hiding away. Then when the approach, when I came, I don't even know. I wouldn't be able to point to a this is what happened. I woke up and now I'm ecological. Like that didn't happen. You're,
That is my experience. That is also mine. I still cannot. I know that you were instrumental in it, but I couldn't go, when was the point I realized? Because there isn't.
Mm,
Obviously, snapshot versus process and experience. Like, there you go.
Yeah.
in a nutshell. But there wasn't this revelation, and I've been asked by Carl multiple times, well, when did you realize? I'm like, I don't know. I just it just happened. All of a sudden, it just happened. Could I tell you how, when, what the context was? No. It was all of a sudden something went, and then it's like, oh, I
That's
hacked the Matrix.
but
And it
that's the
feels
thing.
like that. We've used that analogy before. We swallowed the red pill and now we're
But that's the thing. I don't think there is a situation because obviously it's an evolving thing anyway, perceiving blah blah blah. And the first couple of experiences that I recognized that my approach, my philosophy, the way I acted had changed was I went to a trampoline competition. This is maybe a year later. I'm now at a different trampoline club, and I went to a competition like it's a circuit, National League circuit. You go around, and I went to a competition. I was with this new club, and the people that I had met at the competition from other clubs drastically saw a different. They were like, "Why are you so happy all the time? You're really talkative." And I hadn't recognized that I was so different from when I was at this previous. It wasn't the club's fault. It was the way it just happened to be. But they're like, you don't seem as nervous about the competition. You don't seem so worried. You're talking. You're engaging with other people. You're walking around. Like you just seem different. Were the comments that I was getting from these people at the league, and I mean, it wasn't until a couple of years after that that I recognized actually that was probably the time where I recognized other people had recognized my behavior shift. And to me, I can see that competition. I know those faces. That to me has been somewhat ingrained in my experiences now. And I was curious to see if you had had a similar experience because the approach, even though it's a very long-term shifting change in the way that you behave and you act, and it's constant, it is a current future. I'm
yeah.
constantly changing the way that I interpret with the world or the way that I perform in the world. I don't want to say interpret because that could be misconstrued. The way I perform,
That
experience.
can be that can be misinterpreted.
There's no interpretations here. Well, there's no interpretations within perception here. Uh, I wish languages was easier to navigate. But yeah, so the ongoing change of behavior is ongoing. But there have been experiences, like acute experiences, where people have recognized a change from one period of time to another. And I can see those in myself now as well. And sometimes when I reflect on experiences I've had, I can reflect on the way I would have interacted with that situation previously. And that is how I think empathy comes into the way that we view experiences in the world. And
Mm.
that's why I think older people typically can empathize with other people because they've had varied experiences.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the saying of you need experience to be able to do this job comes in. The experience gives you dynamic relationships with multiple parts of the environment for them to go, oh, I recognize how I felt like this, but then when I shifted and knew this, I felt like this instead. So I can use those two pieces of information to educate how I'm going to act now.
Something that I did this week. So I applied for a traditional job, as it will, which we
What,
can talk
nine to
about.
five?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll talk about that later. But during that, and it was more of a let's just try it. It's something that I'd be really interested in doing. Like it's different. It's a lot of money that I just can show up, do my job, go home, and then do my other things. So it's when the rest of the environment I'm in right now is really crazy and lots is going on, just having some resemblance of structure that is external, well, external, whatever. But I was applying for a job, point taken. And so I had to update my CV, which I had not done in a little bit of a long time.
I've never done it.
And that was fascinating for me as an experience because it made me go, okay, cool. First of all, I realized I've been doing this for 11 years now.
You're old.
Yes, I know. Thank you. I
You're not
was,
actually that much older than me, though. Are you? What's it, 4 years?
I think it's 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm 27. So I won't make you say your age, but
I think I don't even know my own age if I'm being honest, because it's a number. I don't even think about it.
it's
But
it's older than 30. Let's just leave it at that.
it is older than 30, yes. And so as I was kind of writing out all of the things that I had done, I was like, oh yeah, and of course there's that as well. Oh, of course there's that as well. Oh, of course there's that. If I was to write out all of my experiences and all of the stuff that I've done as part of my business, it would have probably have been 30 pages long
Hmm.
because there's so much that you do when you run your own business that you don't realize that you do, but you do because you have to do it.
Yep.
And it's like interesting when you're not attuned to that experience. You just,
I
and
find
one
it
of the big questions I've always been asked by people is how do I, for people who are struggling, is how do you do things? How do you do so much? And my D&D group are like, how are you running 4 campaigns, running a business, and still spending time? I'm like, well, I do know,
yeah.
but just take a seat. We'll be here for a while. So,
I find that interesting because when I talk with people doing PhDs and people in academia, they have a similar experience when they go to writing CVs
mm,
because it's like, well, I've done loads of stuff. There's loads of things I've done because most people that are at the level of a PhD have done conferences, have done work experience in lots of different places. So when they're applying to 5 jobs, I think they are like, I don't think any job is better or worse than another because it depends on the relationship the person has with the environment that they're working in. And a 9 to 5 job adds constraints, which simplifies other areas of
mm.
the person's existence, the person's life. So a 9 to 5 job actually makes sense for a lot of people because of everything else, all of the complexity and chaos that happens in the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And that was emerging for me recently with everything that's going on in life. It's just like, you know, what if?
Yeah.
And the role is dynamic enough and kind of like linked. I won't say exactly what it is on here. We can talk afterwards. That it's linked enough for me to go, oh yeah, actually, I would really quite enjoy that. And it's tied also to what I used to do. Because like when I first started my business, it was in the kind of indie RPG role-playing game industry doing music. And this role is tangential to that. And I'm like, that'd be really cool because I if I was to do what I did then now with all of this experience, I'm like, wow, I would be very like it would be very different now.
Mm.
And just
Yes.
having that like what would I do now with the expertise that I have? It's like, oh, that's fascinating. That's quite exciting. Let's go play with that. And as I was putting the job, I was like, yeah, I don't know. It's very different to what I do. I'm a tech person. I do tech coaching. I do systems development. Like that's very different from a writer. But when you look at all the other pieces that I do, when you look at this podcast, which is a form of content creation, which is part of the role I was looking at, when you look at all the other stuff I've done, all I focused on with all of the other stuff previously was, oh, it's a failed project. It's a failed project. It's a failed thing. It's not done. It's not. Well, actually, no, it's part of a dynamic, evolving like ecosystem of what I've done. And then you look at all of the products that I've created, the digital products, the PDFs, the videos, the courses, the programs, all of those things are part of. And I've said in one of these podcasts, I'm not a content creator. And I'm like, crap. Yeah, I am.
Yep.
Yeah, I am. And I'm like, cool, that's fine. Email marketing, I didn't even put any of that in there because it was just getting too bloody long,
Yeah.
size 9 text to try and squeeze it all in and everything. And it was really it was just an interesting experience to look back because from that specific context.
But that's the thing, you've gained so much expertise in so many different areas that when you look at a job isn't really just the job, because the job has so many other elements to it. The question that I would ask when you do score, if you do start moving forwards in time, obviously here, is what you end up doing. Because lots of people that I've spoken to, either they don't get the job because the person hiring them thought they were overqualified,
Mm.
which potentially you are overqualified,
Yes.
or the person hiring was worried or is worried that they'll leave because you, being the person, have so many abilities. The job is just, oh yeah, just do this thing, and you can do it so quickly that time sort of becomes redundant. And I think this is, I think this would resonate with other people as well that are good at their jobs. They sit there and they go, well, I could do this job in 20 minutes, but this is meant to take me an hour and a half. So it's going to take me an hour and a half because they don't see the point of finishing in 20 minutes and then being told to do more work. That's not efficient use of their time. So I would be interested to see how and if
I
you
would be
manage those
I would be
situations.
interested. I would be interested in that as well, actually. Because I don't know, I would probably want to just do more. I think it because the role I want to do is something that's been actually part of like my own life for a while. It's something that matters. Going back to our topic earlier, it's like I wouldn't mind doing 2 to 3 times as much work because it would be one, I would be developing a skill that is very hyper specific, and two, I would enjoy it because it would be so different to what I'm doing at like in my own work.
Yeah. Okay. I'm wary of the time because I want to eat before
But we have
conversation.
our other one. Yeah.
Anything else you want to add? Right. See you all next week.
Bye.